The gunshot split the night air like thunder. Alder Calloway pressed his massive frame against the swaying wall of the train car, blood seeping through his fingers where they clutched his side. Outside, rain lashed against the windows with vengeful fury, the landscape nothing but a black void beyond the glass. Ahead of him, a white man in a Confederate greatcoat held a terrified colored woman by the hair, pressing a revolver to her temple. "Let her go," Alder commanded, his voice steady despite the pain. "She's done nothing to you." The man sneered, tightening his grip. "Stay back, boy. This ain't your business. I'm making it my business." Alder took a step forward, his imposing height filling the narrow corridor. 6'4" of hard muscle and harder resolve, he'd faced worse than this drunken relic of a lost cause. "This nigger woman stole from me," the man slurred, waving his gun wildly between Alder and his captive. The woman shook her head frantically. "I did no such thing, sir. I was just serving drinks." "Shut your mouth." The man struck her with the gun barrel, drawing blood. Something dark and familiar rose in Alder's chest. 5 years since Appomattox, and still the war raged in small, vicious moments like these. He lunged forward just as the train hit a curve, the car lurching violently. The man fired wildly, the bullet grazing Alder's shoulder. With one powerful blow, Alder sent him crashing against the opposite wall, the gun clattering to the floor. "Run!" he told the woman, who scrambled past him toward the next car. The Confederate drew a knife from his boot. "You'll hang for this, boy." "Not today," Alder replied. The fight was brief but brutal. The man was drunk but skilled with a blade, slashing a deep gash across Alder's ribs before Alder could subdue him. As the conductor and 2 armed railroad guards appeared at the end of the car, the Confederate spat blood and shouted, "He tried to kill me! This nigger tried to murder me!" In the confusion, with rain hammering the roof and passengers screaming, Alder made his decision. The train was slowing for a bridge crossing. With a silent prayer, he wrenched open the door and leapt into the stormy darkness. He landed hard in shallow water, the impact driving what little air remained from his lungs. For a moment, he lay there, rain pelting his face, wondering if this was finally the end of his long journey. Then instinct took over. Dragging himself to his feet, he staggered into the forest, blood trailing behind him like breadcrumbs. Hours later, or perhaps minutes, time had lost meaning. Alder glimpsed a light through the trees. A small cabin perched on the edge of a ravine, smoke curling from its chimney despite the storm. Hope and desperation drove him forward. He collapsed against the door, raising a hand to knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Then darkness claimed him. Mirabel Morgan was reading by candlelight when the knocking came. She froze the book, slipping from her fingers. No one ever came to her door after dark. No one came to her door at all. Setting aside the volume of Emerson, she reached for the shotgun that had belonged to her husband, James. The weapon felt heavy, familiar in her hands, a remnant of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. 3 years a widow, 5 years alone in this cabin at the edge of Wyoming territory. The locals in Redemption called her the Mad Widow on the Hill, a woman who had lost her husband to war and her daughter to the flood, who taught colored children to read, despite threats, who spoke too well for a woman alone on the frontier. The knock came again, weaker this time. Mirabel approached the door cautiously, shotgun raised. "Who's there?" she called, voice steadier than she felt. No answer came. Just the howl of wind and the persistent drumming of rain on her leaking roof. She hesitated, then unbolted the door and pulled it open a crack, the shotgun's barrel leading the way. What greeted her was not a threat, but a mountain of a man collapsed on her porch, blood pooling beneath him. His dark skin glistened with rain, his massive frame curled in on itself like a wounded bear. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. For a moment, she considered closing the door. A colored man wounded at her doorstep meant trouble she couldn't afford. The town already looked for reasons to drive her away. Harboring a fugitive, for what else could he be, would give them cause. The man stirred, raising his head with what seemed like tremendous effort. His eyes met hers not with threat or demand, but something like resignation. "Ma'am," he managed his voice a deep rumble. "I'm sorry to trouble you." Mirabel made her decision. With a quick glance at the storm-darkened forest surrounding her home, she stepped back. "Get inside before you bleed to death on my porch." It took all her strength to help him across the threshold. He tried to stand on his own, but stumbled, nearly taking them both down. Finally, she guided him to the bearskin rug before the hearth. He sank onto it with a groan that seemed to come from his very soul. "You're hurt badly," she observed, setting the shotgun aside, but within reach. "Alder Calloway," he said through gritted teeth. "Lieutenant Company F, 54th Massachusetts Regiment." Mirabel's eyes widened. The 54th, the famous colored regiment that had stormed Fort Wagner. Her husband had spoken of them with respect unusual for a white officer. "The war's been over 5 years, Lieutenant," she said, fetching her medical kit from the shelf. "Some fights never end, ma'am." He attempted to sit up, straighter, wincing. "I don't mean to bring trouble to your door. Just need to rest, stop the bleeding. I'll be gone by morning." Mirabel examined his wounds in the firelight. A bullet grazed across his shoulder, but the real concern was a deep knife wound along his ribs. "You're not going anywhere tomorrow. This needs stitching." As she worked cleaning the wound with whiskey and preparing her needle, she studied him. Despite his size, there was something careful in how he held himself, as if constantly aware of the space he occupied, the impact of his presence. "You're bigger than my house," she said absently, threading the needle. To her astonishment, the man's eyes filled suddenly with tears, one escaping down his weathered cheek before he could catch it. "I'm sorry," he said, looking away. "It's just, no one's ever let me in without question, not once." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. This giant of a man crying at a simple statement of fact. She didn't know how to respond, so she focused on her work, stitching his wound with the skill she'd learned nursing soldiers during the war. "My name is Mirabel Morgan," she said finally. "My husband was Captain James Morgan, Union Army. He died at Spotsylvania Courthouse." Alder nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan." "Mirabel," she corrected. "No one calls me Mrs. Morgan anymore." "Mirabel." He repeated his deep voice, giving the name a dignity she hadn't heard in years. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Alder Calloway slept fitfully on the rug, his massive frame making the cabin seem even smaller than it was. Mirabel watched him from her rocking chair, wondering what trouble she'd invited into her home. When he finally woke, she had coffee waiting. He accepted the tin cup with hands that dwarfed it, nodding his thanks. "You should be dead," she observed. "That wound would have killed a smaller man." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Been told that before." "What happened on that train, Mr. Calloway?" He sipped his coffee before answering. "Man was attacking a colored woman. I intervened. And they blamed you. They always do." He set the cup down carefully. "I work security for the railroad. Hired guns to protect passengers from bandits. Ironic that the real danger was inside the car." Mirabel nodded. She understood all too well how danger often wore a respectable face. "You mentioned the 54th, she said. "You were at Fort Wagner." "Yes, ma'am, one of the few who made it back." "My husband spoke highly of your regiment." Alder studied her, his dark eyes, but is thoughtful. Unusual for a white officer. James was unusual. She busied herself stoking the fire. He believed all men were created equal. Actually, believed it, not just the words. "A rare man." "Yes," she said softly. He was. A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, birds began their morning songs, a counterpoint to the steady drip of water from her leaking roof. Alder followed her gaze upward. "Your roof needs repair." "Everything here needs repair," she replied with a wry smile. "I do what I can, but some tasks require strength I don't possess." He looked around the small cabin, the sagging porch visible through the window, the warped floorboards, the places where rain had stained the walls. "Let me fix it," he said, "to repay your kindness." Mirabel laughed a short, surprised sound. "You can barely stand." "Give me a day to recover. I'm stronger than I look." "You couldn't possibly look stronger," she said, and was rewarded with a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I was a carpenter before the war," he explained. "Built houses in Boston. Your cabin needs work, but nothing I can't handle." She hesitated. Having him stay meant risk. But the roof did need fixing before the next storm, and there was something about Alder Calloway that made her trust him despite every instinct for caution the frontier had taught her. "1 week," she said finally. "Then you should move on. Redemption isn't kind to colored folks, especially big ones, who might frighten the locals." 1 week, he agreed. True to his word, Alder began work the next day, despite Mirabel's protests about his wounds. He moved carefully, but with purpose, examining the roof from all angles before beginning repairs. "Somebody deliberately damaged these shingles," he said, showing her places where the wood had been pried up. "This wasn't just weather." Mirabel's expression darkened. "My brother-in-law, most likely. Cass believes the property should have gone to him when James died. He's tried various ways to drive me out." "The law's on your side. The law's on whoever can enforce it," she replied bitterly. "But yes, James left everything to me properly documented. Cass has no legal claim." Over the next few days, a rhythm developed between them. Alder worked from dawn till dusk, repairing not just the roof, but the porch, the floor, the window frames, anything his skilled hands could fix. Mirabel cooked, tended her small garden, and continued her daily writing in a leather-bound journal. In the evenings they talked. Alder was reserved at first, but gradually opened up about his life, born free in Boston, educated at a school for colored children, apprenticed to a carpenter, until the war called him to serve a country that hardly acknowledged his humanity. In turn, Mirabel shared her own story. Raised in Philadelphia, educated beyond what was considered necessary for women, she'd met James Morgan at a lecture on abolition. Their marriage scandalized her family, not because James was poor, he wasn't, but because he held radical views on equality. "We moved here after the war started," she explained one evening. "James thought I'd be safer away from the fighting." "And your daughter?" Alder asked gently. He had noticed the small portrait on the mantel, a serious-faced girl of about 10, with her mother's determined chin. Mirabel's face tightened with grief. "Sarah, there was a flash flood 3 years ago. They never found her body." "I'm sorry," he said, and she knew he meant it. "The town thinks I killed her," she added, her voice flat. "Or that she ran away because I was a terrible mother. They needed an explanation that made sense to them." "People fear what they don't understand," Alder said. And you, Mirabel Morgan, are beyond their understanding." She looked at him in surprise, unused to being seen so clearly. As the days passed, Mirabel found herself watching Alder work, admiring the fluid strength in his movements, the care he took with every repair. Despite his size, there was a gentleness to him that reminded her of James, a man comfortable enough in his power to have no need to wield it over others. On the fourth day, as Alder repaired her garden wall, Mirabel brought him water and lingered, noticing for the first time a pattern of old scars across his back, visible where his shirt had ridden up. "You were a slave," she said softly, the revelation dawning. He stiffened, but didn't deny it. "Until I was 14, escaped to Boston on the Underground Railroad. I thought you said you were born free." "It's simpler that way." He turned to face her. "People hear 'former slave,' and that's all they see." "I see you, Alder Calloway," she said, holding his gaze. "All of you." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared wounds of survival against impossible odds. That night Mirabel woke to the sound of Alder's voice, low and melodic. Following it to the porch, she found him seated on the steps, staring at the star-filled sky, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. "What are you saying?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter against the night chill. He glanced up, not startled, but not expecting company. "A prayer my grandmother taught me. She was Choctaw. You're part Indian. On my mother's side. My father was a slave, my mother the daughter of a Choctaw woman and a French trapper." He gestured to the stars. "She taught me that our ancestors watch from up there. I like to think they guided me here when I needed shelter." Mirabel settled beside him on the step. "Do you think they're all up there? Everyone we've lost?" "I hope so," he said simply. They sat in companionable silence, the night sounds of the forest surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance an owl called its plaintive query, echoing through the trees. "There's something you should know," Alder said finally. "I wasn't completely honest about why I was on that train." Mirabel tensed, but kept her voice steady. "I'm listening. I was tracking someone. A man named Blackwood, Colonel Elijah Blackwood. He served in the Confederate Army, but his real business was selling weapons to both sides during the war. A profiteer. Worse. After the war, he organized militia groups targeting freed slaves, burning settlements, murdering families." Alder's voice hardened. "Including mine." Mirabel's hand moved instinctively to cover his. "Your family." "My wife, my son and daughter." His voice caught. "While I was away working for the railroad, Blackwood led the raid personally." "I'm so sorry, Alder." "I've been tracking him for 2 years. He's heading west, establishing himself as a respectable businessman. Word is he's settled near here. Calls himself a town leader now." A chill ran through Mirabel that had nothing to do with the night air. "Elijah Blackwood is the mayor of Redemption." Alder's head snapped toward her. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. He arrived about 18 months ago. Bought the largest house in town, invested in the new railroad spur, presents himself as a pillar of the community." She hesitated. "And he's been trying to buy my land." "Why yours, specifically?" "It's the last piece he needs to complete his railroad connection. Every other property owner in the valley has sold to him." She gestured to the surrounding forest. "This land has been surveyed for the new track, but I've refused every offer." Alder stood abruptly, scanning the tree line with new intensity. "We may have less time than I thought." "What do you mean?" Blackwood doesn't take no for an answer. "If he wants this land—" He trailed off, his expression grim. Mirabel followed his gaze to the dark forest. For the first time she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. "There's something else," Alder said, his voice low. "Before I jumped from that train, I saw Blackwood in the first-class car. He recognized me. Then he knows you're here." Mirabel whispered, fear constricting her throat. "Not yet, but he will soon." Alder turned to her, his face solemn in the moonlight. "I should leave. I've brought danger to your door." "No," she said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "This is my home. I won't be driven from it, not by Blackwood, not by fear." Alder studied her for a long moment. "You're a brave woman, Mirabel Morgan." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just tired of running." The next morning, while fetching water from the stream, Mirabel noticed fresh hoofprints in the mud. Someone had been watching the cabin. She mentioned it to Alder, who immediately retrieved something from his pack, a Springfield rifle meticulously maintained despite its age. As he checked the weapon, Mirabel noticed something carved into the wooden stock. "To Colonel E. Blackwood, from your brother-in-arms, J. Morgan." Her heart stopped. "Where did you get this?" Alder looked up, registering her shock. "From a Union officer who died saving my life at Petersburg. He gave me this rifle, told me to use it if I ever found Blackwood." He frowned. "What's wrong?" "J. Morgan," she whispered. "James Morgan, my husband." Understanding dawned in Alder's eyes. "Your husband gave me this rifle." "But that's impossible," Mirabel said, her world tilting. "James died at Spotsylvania." "Cookie?" Alder said quietly. "Captain Morgan survived Spotsylvania. He was at Petersburg in '65. He saved my life and dozens of others." "That can't be true. I received official notification of his death. A letter from his commanding officer. Colonel Elijah Blackwood." Alder said, the pieces falling into place. "Blackwood was James Morgan's commanding officer." Mirabel staggered backward, gripping the table for support. "Are you saying Blackwood lied about James's death? Why would he do that?" Alder's expression darkened. "Because your husband knew what Blackwood was doing. Selling weapons to the enemy, profiting from the war." He held up the rifle. "This wasn't a gift. It was evidence." Mirabel sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Everything she had believed about her husband's death, the grief she had carried for 5 years, suddenly stood on shifting ground. "If James was alive at Petersburg," she said slowly, "then when did he really die? And why did Blackwood lie to me?" "I don't know," Alder admitted, "but I intend to find out." Outside, the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a weighted silence that pressed against the cabin like a physical force. Alder moved to the window, rifle ready. "We need to prepare," he said quietly. "They're coming." "James was alive." Mirabel's voice trembled as she paced the worn floorboards. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's eastern window, casting long shadows across the room. "All this time, I thought—" "We don't know the full story yet," Alder cautioned, his eyes never leaving the tree line beyond the window. "But Captain Morgan definitely survived Spotsylvania. He saved my life at Petersburg in '65. Mirabel stopped pacing, her fingers tracing the carved initials on the rifle's stock. 5 years of grief and loneliness suddenly thrown into question. "Tell me about him. How he was when you saw him." Alder's expression softened. "Brave, determined. He led a charge to rescue a group of colored soldiers captured by Confederate forces. We'd been told they'd be executed at dawn." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your husband risked everything to save men most officers wouldn't have valued. Tears welled in Mirabelle's eyes. That sounds like James. Before he sent me away with the rescued men, he gave me this rifle and a message. If you ever encounter Colonel Blackwood, remember this weapon belongs to him. Alder frowned. I didn't understand the significance then. And James, what happened to him after he sent you away? He stayed behind to cover our retreat. The last I saw, he was holding position at an old farmhouse. Confederate forces surrounded it just as we escaped. Alder met her gaze directly. I always assumed he died there, but I never saw it happen. Mirabelle sank into her rocking chair, mind racing. 2 weeks after Spotsylvania, I received official notification that James had been killed in action. The letter came from Colonel Blackwood himself. A deliberate lie, Alder said grimly. But why? What could Blackwood possibly gain by telling me James was dead if he wasn't? Alder considered this. Whatever your husband knew about Blackwood, it was dangerous enough that Blackwood wanted to erase him, not just physically, but from memory. Making sure his wife believed he was dead was part of that erasure. A sudden terrible thought struck Mirabelle. Cass, my brother-in-law, he started coming around shortly after I received that letter. Said James had asked him to look after me if anything happened. Her voice hardened. He works for Blackwood now. Then we need to be extremely careful. Alder moved away from the window. Do you have somewhere safe to keep your valuables? Papers, jewelry, anything important? There's a hidden compartment beneath the hearth. James built it before he left for war. She knelt by the fireplace, removing a loose stone to reveal a small iron box. I keep his letters here and Sarah's locket. What about his personal effects? The army would have returned them after his death. Mirabelle hesitated. Just his wedding ring and a small notebook. Blackwood himself delivered them. May I see the notebook? She retrieved it from the box, a small leather volume, its pages filled with James's neat handwriting. Alder flipped through it carefully, brow furrowed in concentration. It's mostly personal thoughts, observations about the war, Mirabelle explained. Nothing that seems important. Sometimes what's important isn't what's written, but how, Alder murmured. He held a page up to the light. Your husband was clever. Look here, see how certain letters are marked with tiny dots beneath them? Mirabelle leaned closer. I never noticed that. It's a code. We used similar methods in the 54th to pass messages. Alder's finger traced the pattern. I'd need time to decipher it completely, but I'd bet my life this contains evidence against Blackwood. A new sense of purpose straightened Mirabelle's shoulders. Then we need to protect it and use it. Alder nodded, handing the notebook back. Hide this somewhere even safer than that box. If Blackwood realizes, you have it. He already suspects, Mirabelle cut in. That's why he's been trying to buy my land. It's not about the railroad. It's about making sure any evidence James might have hidden here is destroyed. The realization settled between them, weighty with implication. Mirabelle wasn't just a widow refusing to sell her property. She was the unwitting guardian of evidence that could destroy a powerful man. We need supplies, Alder said finally. Food, ammunition, medicine for my wounds. We should prepare for a siege. I'll go to town, Mirabelle decided. You're too recognizable and still healing. I can be there and back before noon. Alder clearly didn't like the idea, but nodded reluctantly. Be careful. Don't speak to anyone you don't absolutely trust. There's only one person in Redemption I trust even a little, she said, already gathering her shawl and basket. Dr. Abernathy. He treated colored soldiers during the war and still faces scorn for it. Abernathy, Alder's head snapped up. Samuel Abernathy, Yes, do you know him? He was a surgeon with the 54th at Fort Wagner. Saved more lives than God that day. Alder's expression lightened slightly. If he's in redemption, we might have one ally. Mirabel changed into her town clothes, a modest gray dress that had seen better days, but still maintained an air of dignified poverty. She tucked a small derringer into her pocket, another of James's legacies. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised, mounting her aging mare. "If I'm not back by sundown, I'll come find you," Alder said firmly. "No matter what." Redemption had grown since Mirabel first arrived with James 8 years earlier. What had been a dusty collection of wooden structures along a single street had expanded to a proper frontier town, boasting a hotel, 2 saloons, a bank, and even a small theater. The railroad's influence was evident in the newer buildings, constructed with materials that would have been impossible to transport before the Iron Horse reached Wyoming territory. Mirabel kept her head down as she rode through the main street, aware of the stares that followed her. The mad widow rarely came to town these days, and her presence always sparked curiosity and gossip. She tied her horse outside Abernathy's small clinic, steeling herself before entering. The waiting room was empty, save for a young colored woman sweeping the floor, who looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Morgan," she said, dropping into a small curtsy, "doctor's with a patient, but he won't be long." "Thank you, Martha." Mirabel settled on a bench basket in her lap. "How is your reading coming along?" The girl brightened. "Much better, ma'am. I finished that primer you gave me, and Dr. Abernathy's been letting me practice on his medical journals." Before Mirabel could respond, the inner door opened, and Dr. Samuel Abernathy emerged, escorting an elderly patient. Tall and lean, with a salt-and-pepper beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, the doctor had the perpetually tired look of a man who carried too many burdens. "Bed rest, Mr. Jenkins, and that tonic twice daily," he instructed, before noticing Mirabel. Surprise flickered across his features. "Mrs. Morgan, this is unexpected." Once the other patient had left, Abernathy ushered Mirabel into his consultation room, closing the door firmly behind them. "You rarely come to town without urgent cause," he observed, gesturing for her to sit. "Are you unwell?" "I need supplies," she said quietly. "Bandages, laudanum, alcohol for cleaning wounds." Abernathy's shrewd eyes narrowed. "You're treating someone?" "Yes. Someone you don't want the town to know about." Mirabel met his gaze steadily. "Would you believe me if I said it was for a wounded bear?" A slight smile touched the doctor's lips. "I would not, but I respect your discretion." He began gathering supplies. This wouldn't happen to be related to the rumors of a large colored man seen jumping from the eastbound train during the storm. Mirabel tensed. "What rumors?" Blackwood's men have been asking questions, quietly but persistently. Abernathy packed the supplies into a small bag. "They're searching for someone they claim attacked a passenger." "And you believe that story? I believe very little that comes from Blackwood or his associates." The doctor handed her the bag. "Just as I suspect there's more to your sudden need for medical supplies than you're telling me." Mirabel hesitated, then lowered her voice. "What if I told you James might not have died at Spotsylvania?" Abernathy stilled his expression unreadable. "I'd say that's a dangerous line of inquiry, Mirabel, but not an impossible one." The doctor sighed heavily, removing his spectacles to polish them, a nervous habit. "I never saw your husband's body. Few did. The official report stated he was killed leading a charge against Confederate artillery, his body too damaged to recover." A report filed by Colonel Blackwood. "Yes," Abernathy replaced his glasses. "Who arrived in our little town 18 months ago and has been consolidating power ever since." He studied her intently. "What do you know, Mirabel?" "Not enough, but I intend to find out more." She stood tucking the medical supplies into her basket. "There's something else. Do you know if anyone new is working at Blackwood's estate? A young woman, perhaps?" A shadow crossed the doctor's face. "He brought a girl back from his last trip east. Claims she's a distant relative, orphaned and in need of protection." His voice lowered. "She's kept isolated. I was called once when she fell ill, but Blackwood hovered throughout my examination, preventing any private conversation." Mirabel's heart quickened. "How old? What does she look like?" 16, perhaps 17. Dark hair, light eyes. Abernathy hesitated. "There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't place it." "I need to see her," Mirabel whispered half to herself. "That would be extremely dangerous. Blackwood guards his household like a fortress." Nevertheless, she reached for her purse. "What do I owe you for the supplies?" Abernathy waved away her offer of payment. "Consider it a professional courtesy." He walked her to the door, then added quietly, "Whatever you're involved in, be careful. Blackwood has the town marshal in his pocket, and armed men at his call. He's not a man who tolerates obstacles." "I'm well aware," Mirabel replied grimly. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, a commotion from the direction of the hotel caught her attention. A procession of horses and carriages approached, clearly important visitors arriving. Townspeople gathered to watch as the entourage halted before the hotel's entrance. From the lead carriage emerged a man Mirabel had hoped to avoid: Elijah Blackwood himself. Tall and distinguished, with a neatly trimmed white beard and the erect posture of a military man, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit. He turned to assist a young woman from the carriage, and Mirabel's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, there was something hauntingly familiar about the girl's profile, the way she held herself. Could it possibly be Sarah? She whispered the name, a prayer on her lips. The girl turned slightly, scanning the crowd with a detached curiosity. Her face had matured, but those eyes, James's eyes, were unmistakable. Mirabel started forward without thinking, only to feel Abernathy's restraining hand on her arm. "Not here," he warned under his breath. "Not now. You'll put her in danger." The rational part of Mirabel knew he was right, but every maternal instinct screamed to run to her daughter, to reclaim what had been lost. She watched paralyzed as Blackwood guided the girl into the hotel, his proprietary hand on her back, making Mirabel's blood boil. "That's her, isn't it?" Abernathy asked quietly. "You're Sarah." "Yes." Mirabel managed tears, threatening. "She's alive. He's had her all this time. You can't confront him in public. He'd have you arrested or worse." "Then what do I do?" The desperation in her voice was raw. "Go home. Prepare. I'll gather what information I can about Blackwood's movements and send word." Abernathy's eyes were kind but firm. "You've survived 3 years believing she was dead. A few more days won't break you." Mirabel nodded numbly, her mind already racing ahead. Sarah was alive. The knowledge changed everything and nothing. Blackwood still stood between Mirabel and everything she held dear, but now the stakes were immeasurably higher. She completed her shopping in a daze, mechanically purchasing flour coffee ammunition for James's old revolver. All the while her eyes returned to the hotel where her daughter had disappeared. As she mounted her horse to leave town, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she found herself face to face with Cass Morgan, her brother-in-law. "Mirabel!" He greeted her too loudly for privacy. "What brings you to civilization? Run out of books to read to the squirrels." Cass had never been a handsome man, but the years had hardened his features into something actively unpleasant. Where James had been thoughtful and gentle, Cass was all sharp edges and simmering resentment. "Just supplies," she replied evenly. "If you'll excuse me, no time for family." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I hear you've been harboring a fugitive. That's a dangerous game, sister." Mirabel kept her expression neutral, despite the chill that ran through her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you." Cass glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Blackwood knows about your guest. He sent men to watch your place." "Why are you telling me this?" Something unreadable flickered across Cass's face. "Because, contrary to what you think, I don't want to see you dead. James wouldn't have wanted that." "You've never cared what James wanted," she replied coldly. "You're wrong about that. You're wrong about a lot of things." He stepped back. "Get rid of your visitor, Mirabel, before it's too late." Before she could respond, he walked away, shoulders hunched against the weight of secrets she couldn't begin to guess. Alder was waiting on the porch when Mirabel returned rifle across his knees. The relief on his face when he saw her quickly gave way to concern as he registered her expression. "What happened?" he asked, helping her dismount. Mirabel waited until they were inside doors secured to tell him everything. Sarah's apparent resurrection, Blackwood's possession of her daughter Cass's warning, Abernathy's caution. Alder listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. "It makes a twisted kind of sense," he said finally. "Blackwood takes your daughter, lets you believe she's dead, then uses her as leverage against you without you even knowing it." "But why?" Mirabel demanded. "What could I possibly have that's worth all this? The notebook, the land, whatever secrets James entrusted to you knowingly or not." Alder paced the small cabin, his size making the movement reminiscent of a caged tiger. "Blackwood's building something here, power, legitimacy, a future scrubbed clean of his past. Your husband knew enough to threaten that." "And now we do, too," Mirabel said softly. Alder nodded grimly. "Which makes us targets." They spent the remainder of the day preparing the cabin for defense, reinforcing doors, positioning furniture to provide cover, establishing clear fields of fire through the windows. As they worked, Mirabel told Alder everything she could remember about Blackwood's estate on the outskirts of town, describing its layout from her few visits during social occasions when James was still alive. "The girl Sarah will be kept in the East Wing," Alder theorized. "It has fewer windows and better security." "We can't just storm the place," Mirabel pointed out. "He has at least a dozen men all armed." "No," Alder agreed. "But we need to get a message to her somehow. If she knows you're alive and looking for her—" "She might not remember me," Mirabel said, the thought piercing her heart. "She was only 10 when the flood took her. 3 years is a lifetime at that age." "A mother's love leaves marks too deep to erase," Alder said gently. "Even if her mind doesn't remember, her heart might." As night fell, they shared a simple meal by the fire. Mirabel found herself studying Alder's profile in the flickering light, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from him despite all he had endured. "Tell me about your family," she said softly. "The ones you lost." Pain flashed across his features, but he didn't deflect the question. "Eliza was my wife. We met in a church in Boston, married in '61, just before I enlisted. She was a seamstress, educated like you could read and write, taught others when she had time." His voice warmed with memory. Our son John was 7 when they died, smart as a whip, always asking questions. Our daughter Ruby was just 4. I'm sorry, Mirabel whispered. They died because I wasn't there to protect them. He continued, his voice hollow. Blackwood led a raid on colored settlements in Tennessee after the war, claimed they were harboring insurrectionists. 23 people killed, homes burned to the ground. It wasn't your fault. I should have been there. And died with them, Mirabel challenged gently. What justice would that have served? Alder had no answer for that. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph. A beautiful woman with intelligent eyes seated with 2 children at her side. They're beautiful, Mirabel said sincerely. Yes, they were. He tucked the photo away carefully. I keep going for them, to make sure Blackwood pays for what he did. Vengeance won't bring them back. No, he acknowledged. But justice might give their deaths meaning. They fell silent, each lost in private grief. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its mournful cry echoing through the trees. We should rest, Alder said eventually. Take shifts keeping watch. I'll take first watch, Mirabel offered. Alder shook his head. You're exhausted. Sleep. I'll wake you in 4 hours. Too tired to argue, Mirabel retired to her small bedroom, leaving the door ajar. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Her mind raced with the day's revelations, James possibly alive longer than she'd believed, Sarah definitely alive, and in Blackwood's clutches, Cass's unexpected warning. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a confused tangle of past and present. James calling to her across a battlefield, Sarah reaching out from swirling floodwaters, Alder standing between them like a sentinel rifle raised against unseen threats. She woke suddenly to Alder's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent but low. Someone's coming. Multiple riders. Fully alert in an instant, Mirabel reached for the revolver beside her bed. How many? At least 6 from the sound, still a ways off, but approaching deliberately, not trying to hide their approach. That was strange. If Blackwood meant to attack, surely he'd opt for stealth. An official visit, then? Perhaps. Alder handed her the Springfield rifle. Either way, best to be prepared. They took positions by different windows, Mirabel at the front, Alder covering the rear approach. Minutes ticked by in tense silence until finally the riders emerged from the tree line. In the moonlight, Mirabel could make out 6 mounted men led by a figure she recognized with a sinking heart. Town Marshal Davis Blackwood's lackey. Beside him rode Cass, his expression unreadable, even from this distance. Alder Calloway, the marshal called out, his voice carrying easily in the night air. Come out with your hands raised. I am Marshal Davis of Wyoming Territory. Mirabel glanced back at Alder, who had moved to join her at the front window. Beyond the marshal, she could see Blackwood himself mounted on a magnificent black stallion, flanked by 3 armed men. They're not here to arrest you, she whispered. They're here to kill all of us. I know, Alder replied grimly, checking his pistol. And there will be more in the trees waiting. The marshal's voice rang out again. Mrs. Morgan, we know you're harboring a fugitive. Send him out, and no harm will come to you. What do we do? Mirabel asked, fear and determination warring within her. Alder's expression was resolute. We fight. For James. For Sarah. For everyone Blackwood has destroyed. He squeezed her shoulder gently. But you don't have to. There's still a chance for you to— No, she cut him off. This is my home. My fight. I'm not running. A smile, proud and sad in equal measure, crossed Alder's face. Then he moved to the door, positioning himself to the side. "What do you want, Marshal?" he called, voice strong and steady. "Alder Calloway, you're wanted for the assault of a passenger aboard the eastbound train and for fleeing justice." "That's a lie, and you know it," Alder responded calmly. "I defended a woman being attacked. Ask the conductor. Ask the other passengers." "Come out peacefully and you'll get a fair trial," the marshal insisted, though his tone suggested otherwise. Blackwood nudged his horse forward. "Mrs. Morgan," he called, his cultured voice at odds with the menace it carried, "I understand you've been making inquiries about matters that don't concern you. Dangerous inquiries." Mirabel moved to stand behind Alder, though she remained out of sight. "Colonel Blackwood," she acknowledged. "What matters would those be? My husband's true fate, my daughter's abduction, your war profiteering." A tense silence followed her words. When Blackwood spoke again, his voice had lost its veneer of civility. "I've tried to be patient. I've made generous offers for this worthless piece of land. I've overlooked your eccentricities, but my patience has limits." "As does mine," Mirabel replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. "You have my daughter. I want her back." "Sarah is under my protection," Blackwood said smoothly. "She's been well cared for, educated, given opportunities you could never provide. She belongs with her mother. She believes her mother is dead. A mercy, considering the alternative." Blackwood's voice hardened. "This is your final opportunity, Mrs. Morgan. Send out Calloway, surrender your husband's effects, and I'll consider allowing supervised visits with the girl." Alder glanced at Mirabel, his expression questioning. She shook her head minutely. "No deals with the devil." "We seem to be at an impasse," Alder called out. "You want me, but I have no intention of being lynched for a crime I didn't commit." "Then we'll smoke you out!" one of Blackwood's men shouted, brandishing a torch. Marshal Davis shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now hold on, Jenkins. This is a legal matter." "This is my matter," Blackwood interrupted coldly, "and I've lost patience." He gave a sharp gesture, and the men with torches spurred their horses forward. "They're going to burn us out." Mirabel gasped. Alder raised his pistol. "Not if I have anything to say about it." His first shot caught the lead rider in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. The torch fell harmlessly into the dirt. The other men scattered, seeking cover, as Alder's second shot whistled past them. "Take cover!" Blackwood shouted, wheeling his horse around. The night erupted in gunfire. Bullets splintered the cabin's walls as Mirabel and Alder returned fire from the windows. The superior position of the cabin on high ground gave them some advantage, but they were badly outnumbered. "We need to get to the cellar," Alder shouted over the din. "They'll try to circle around back." As if confirming his words, Mirabel heard movement at the rear of the cabin. She swung around just as the back door burst open, revealing Cass with pistol drawn. "Cass, don't!" she cried, raising her revolver. Her brother-in-law froze his expression, conflicted. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the barrel of her gun. "They're going to kill you," he said finally, his voice rough. "Both of you." "Then why are you here?" she demanded. "To save your life, you stubborn woman." To her shock, he lowered his weapon. "There's a way out, through the root cellar. James showed me years ago." Alder appeared at Mirabel's side, his own gun trained on Cass. "Why should we trust you?" "Because despite what my brother's widow thinks, I'm not a monster," Cass snapped. "And because Blackwood has something I want too." "What?" Mirabel asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "The truth about how James really died." Cass's eyes were haunted. Blackwood's been holding it over me for years, using it to keep me in line. Outside, the gunfire intensified. A bullet shattered the window beside them, sending glass flying. "We don't have time for this," Cass urged. "Decide now, trust me, or die here." Mirabelle looked to Alder, who gave a single tight nod. "The cellar," she agreed. "Show us." The root cellar smelled of damp earth and forgotten potatoes. Mirabelle led the way down the narrow stairs, a lantern held high illuminating the cramped space beneath her cabin. Alder followed, his massive frame barely clearing the low-ceiling rifle at the ready. Cass brought up the rear, constantly glancing behind, as gunfire continued to pepper the cabin above. "There." Cass pointed to what appeared to be a solid dirt wall. "Behind those shelves." Alder moved the empty shelving unit aside, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. "James built this?" Mirabelle asked, surprise evident in her voice. "During the first year you lived here," Cass confirmed. "Said a man should always have a back door." "How did you know about it when I didn't?" "James showed me when he enlisted. Made me promise to get you out this way if trouble ever came." A flash of genuine pain crossed Cass's face. "He didn't trust me with much, but he trusted me with that." Above them, the sounds of splintering wood and breaking glass intensified. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards they were burning the cabin. "They'll figure out we're gone soon enough," Alder warned. "We need to move." Mirabelle hesitated, looking around the cellar at the few possessions she'd stored there: preserved food, winter blankets, the last physical remnants of her life with James. "It's just things," Cass said with unexpected gentleness. "They can be replaced. You can't." She nodded grimly and crawled into the tunnel, swallowing her fear of the enclosed space. The passage extended about 30 yards, sloping gradually upward before terminating in a trap door hidden by brush and fallen logs. When they emerged, they found themselves in a small clearing about 100 yards from the cabin, which was now fully engulfed in flames. Silhouetted against the inferno, Blackwood's men searched the perimeter, clearly confused by their quarry's disappearance. From this distance, Mirabelle could see Blackwood himself, mounted on his black stallion, gesturing angrily as he berated the marshal. "They'll start searching the woods soon," Alder murmured. "We need to keep moving." "Where?" Mirabelle asked, the reality of her situation sinking in. Her home, humble as it was, now blazed like a funeral pyre. Everything she owned, every tangible connection to her former life, consumed by flames. "I know a place," Cass said. "Old hunting cabin about 5 miles north. Belongs to a friend of James from before the war. No one uses it anymore." Alder regarded him with suspicion. "Why are you helping us?" Cass met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because Blackwood has something I want." "You mentioned that," Mirabelle said. "What truth about James are you after?" "Not here," Cass insisted, glancing toward the burning cabin. "We need to move now, talk later." Reluctantly, they followed him into the dense forest, keeping to game trails and creek beds to mask their tracks. The night was clear but moonless, making travel treacherous. More than once, Mirabelle stumbled over hidden roots, caught each time by Alder's steady hand. "I'm sorry about your home," he said quietly as they walked. "It's just a house," she replied, though her voice betrayed her. "Sarah is what matters now." They traveled in tense silence for nearly 2 hours, climbing steadily into the foothills. Finally, they crested a ridge and saw the cabin, little more than a one-room shack, with a stone chimney nearly invisible among the pines. "Wait here," Cass instructed, approaching cautiously. He circled the structure, checking for signs of recent occupation, before signaling the all-clear. The interior was Spartan, but clean: a small iron stove, A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise the cabin seemed well-maintained. "Someone checks on this place," Alder observed, examining the wood stacked neatly beside the stove. "Two Rivers does," Cass said, lighting a lantern. "He hunts these hills." "Two Rivers." Alder's head snapped up. "Isaiah Two Rivers." "You know him?" Mirabel asked. "He served with the 54th Choctaw Man, best scout in the regiment." Alder's expression brightened slightly. "If he's nearby, we have another ally." Cass secured the door and windows before finally dropping onto one of the chairs with a weary sigh. "He'll be along. Probably already knows we're here." Mirabel remained standing, arms crossed. "I think it's time you explained yourself, Cass. Why the sudden change of heart? For years, you've tried to drive me off that land, threatened me, made my life hell. Now you're saving us from Blackwood." Cass rubbed his face tiredly. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," Alder suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. After a long moment, Cass reached into his coat and withdrew a flask. He took a long pull before speaking. "What do you know about how James died?" "Until recently, I believed he died at Spotsylvania," Mirabel said carefully. "Now I know he survived at least until Petersburg." "He survived Petersburg, too," Cass said flatly. "James didn't die in battle at all." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the night creatures outside seemed to hold their breath. "How do you know this?" Mirabel finally managed her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I saw him, after the war, in Tennessee." Cass took another drink. "August of '65, 3 months after Appomattox. I was working as a scout for the occupation forces. James showed up at my camp one night, looking like hell, wounded, fevered, half-starved." Mirabel sank onto the second chair legs, suddenly unable to support her. "That's impossible. I received notification of his death in May of '64. Blackwood's doing," Cass confirmed. "James told me he'd discovered Blackwood was selling weapons and information to the Confederates. When Blackwood realized, James knew he tried to have him killed at Spotsylvania. When that failed, he reported him dead anyway." "Why would James not come home?" Mirabel demanded. "Why let me believe he was dead?" "To protect you and Sarah," Cass said simply. "Blackwood made it clear he'd kill you both if James exposed him. So James went underground gathering evidence, building a case against Blackwood that would stand up even against a decorated war hero." Alder leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. "That matches what he told me at Petersburg. He was documenting Blackwood's treason." "What happened in Tennessee?" Mirabel pressed her mind, reeling. "If James survived the war, where is he now?" Cass's face darkened. "He had evidence ledgers, witness statements, even weapons with Confederate and Union markings from the same shipment. He was on his way to Washington to present everything to the War Department." He paused, draining the last of his flask. "The night he came to my camp, he asked me to help get a message to you. Said it was finally almost over, that he'd be home soon." "But he never came," Mirabel whispered. 2 days later, his body was found in the Cumberland River. Official ruling was accidental drowning, but his saddlebags, with all his evidence, were missing. Alder's eyes narrowed. "And Blackwood arrived in camp the same day James's body was found. Offered me a job on the spot, good pay, respectable work." Cass's laugh was hollow. "Said he'd always admired James and wanted to make sure his brother was taken care of. You knew, Mirabel accused, rising from her chair. You knew all this time that Blackwood killed James, and you worked for him anyway. I didn't know, Cass shouted, then immediately lowered his voice. Not for certain. Blackwood never admitted anything outright. But he made sure I understood that crossing him would be unwise. So you chose to side with your brother's murderer. Alder said, his quiet tone more damning than anger would have been. I chose to survive, Cass retorted, and to find the truth. Blackwood has journals, James's journals. He keeps them locked in his study. I've been trying to get to them for years. Mirabel shook her head in disgust. While threatening me, trying to force me off my land. Your brother's land. I was playing a part, Cass insisted. If Blackwood suspected I was anything but loyal, I'd have ended up like James. The best way to help you was to make him think I was on his side. Some help, Mirabel scoffed. Terrorizing me, vandalizing my home. I never damaged your property, Cass said firmly. That was Blackwood's other men. I made noise, made threats, all for show. Alder cut in before Mirabel could respond. What changed? Why help us now? Because of Sarah. Cass's voice softened. When Blackwood brought her back, claiming she was some distant relative, I knew. She has James's eyes. But she didn't recognize me, didn't seem to remember anything from before. The flood, Mirabel breathed. She must have hit her head, lost her memory. Blackwood found her downriver, took her east to Boston. Had her educated at some fancy school for girls, groomed her to be the perfect society daughter. Cass looked directly at Mirabel. He's been using her as insurance against you all this time without you even knowing it. But why keep her? Alder asked. Why not just— He trailed off, unwilling to voice the darkest possibility. Because of the notebook, Mirabel realized suddenly. James must have hidden information somewhere only I would know to look. Blackwood kept Sarah alive to control me if I ever discovered the truth. And to hurt you, Cass added. Blackwood enjoys his revenge served slow. Watching you grieve while he raised your daughter as his own, that's exactly the kind of twisted satisfaction he'd take. The door opened suddenly, causing all three to reach for weapons. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the night sky, a Native American man with graying braids, and a Winchester rifle held non-threateningly at his side. 2 Rivers. Alder breathed, lowering his pistol. Calloway, the newcomer acknowledged with a nod. Long way from Boston. Long way from Fort Wagner. Alder returned a smile breaking across his face. 2 Rivers stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His weathered face betrayed little emotion, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as they moved from Alder to Mirabel to Cass. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, he observed dryly. Blackwood has men combing the foothills. Put a bounty on all your heads. Isaiah, Mirabel greeted him with genuine warmth. Thank you for the use of your cabin. James built it, 2 Rivers replied simply. Said someday you might need it. His gaze shifted to Cass. Didn't expect to find you here, Morgan. Thought you were Blackwood's man. It's complicated, Cass muttered. Usually is. 2 Rivers set his rifle aside and began stoking the stove. You'll need to move at first light. Blackwood's reached out to the territorial governor claiming you're dangerous fugitives. By tomorrow, there'll be a legal posse after you. We need to get to Sarah, Mirabel insisted. She's at Blackwood's estate. 2 Rivers nodded. Heavily guarded. I've scouted it. At least a dozen men, all armed. We can't leave her there, Mirabel said desperately. Not now that I know she's alive. No, Alder agreed. But we need a plan better than charging in with guns blazing. 2 Rivers removed his coat, revealing a buckskin shirt adorned with military buttons, a unique blend of his native heritage and Union service. "There's something else you should know. Blackwood isn't just some corrupt officer who profited from the war. He's building power here. Territorial legislature, railroad contracts, mining interests. He's positioning himself for Congress, maybe higher." A man with that much blood on his hands, Alder's disgust was palpable. "History is written by the victors," Two Rivers said grimly, "and in the New West victory belongs to men with money and connections. Blackwood has both. Then we need to expose him," Mirabel decided. "Find James's evidence and make it public." "It won't be in the house," Cass interjected. "Blackwood's too careful. He'd keep anything truly damning somewhere separate." An idea struck Mirabel. "The notebook, James's journal that Blackwood returned to me. It's in code." "Where is it now?" Two Rivers asked. "Hidden in the hearth at my cabin." Her heart sank. "Which is now ash." "Maybe not," Alder said thoughtfully. "That hiding place under the hearth, it might have survived the fire." "Too dangerous to check now," Two Rivers cautioned. "They'll be watching the ruins." Mirabel rubbed her temples, trying to think through her exhaustion and grief. James would have had a backup plan. He was meticulous that way. "The land," Cass said suddenly. "It was never about the railroad route. Blackwood wants your land because James hid something there." "But where—" Mirabel spread her hands in frustration. "I've lived on that property for 8 years. If there was something hidden there, wouldn't I have found it?" "Not necessarily," Alder mused. "During the war, we sometimes hid messages in plain sight, carved into fence posts, woven into quilt patterns, marked on trees, in ways that looked like natural damage." Two Rivers nodded. "Or buried at specific compass points from fixed landmarks." A memory stirred in Mirabel's mind, James showing her the property boundaries shortly after they arrived. He'd been particular about a certain oak tree, explaining how to measure distance from it if she ever needed to confirm the property line. "The boundary oak," she said slowly. "James made a point of showing it to me, made sure I understood how to find true north from it." "Worth investigating," Two Rivers agreed, "but not tonight. You need rest. I'll keep watch." Despite her exhaustion, Mirabel found sleep elusive. She lay on the narrow cot, mind racing with the day's revelations. James had survived. Spotsylvania had lived to see the war's end, had been murdered for his principles. Sarah was alive, held captive by the man responsible for her father's death. And Cass, the brother-in-law, she'd despised for years, was perhaps not the villain she'd believed. Through the cabin's single window, she watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars James must have gazed upon during those long months he'd spent gathering evidence, believing he was protecting his family through his absence. The same stars that had witnessed Sarah's survival and captivity, Alder's journey of vengeance. Two Rivers' solitary vigil in these mountains. All paths converging here now, with Blackwood at their center, like a malevolent spider. Dawn came too quickly. Two Rivers roused them before first light, his expression grave. "Riders approaching from the south," he reported. "Moving carefully, trying to be quiet." "How many?" Alder asked, instantly alert. "4, maybe 5. "How did they find us?" Mirabel whispered. Cass checked his pistol grimly. "Blackwood has scouts who can track a ghost through a snowstorm." "We need to split up," Two Rivers decided. "Draw them in different directions." "No," Mirabel protested. "We stay together." "Not practical," Alder countered gently. "Together, we are easier to track, easier to corner." Two Rivers nodded agreement. "I know these mountains better than anyone." I can lead them on a chase that ends nowhere. I'll head east, Cass volunteered. Make them think we're running for the territorial border. And us? Mirabelle asked, looking to Alder. We find that boundary oak, he said firmly. If James hid evidence there, it's our best chance of stopping Blackwood. They gathered what supplies they could, food, ammunition. 2 Rivers' spare canteen. As they prepared to depart, Cass approached Mirabelle awkwardly. I know you have no reason to trust me, he began. You're right, I don't, she cut him off. But I believe you loved James in your way. That's enough for now. Something like relief crossed his face. Be careful. Blackwood's desperate now. That makes him dangerous. I know what desperate men are capable of, she replied evenly. 2 Rivers led them down a hidden trail behind the cabin, pointing out landmarks to guide Alder and Mirabelle back toward her property by a circuitous route. There's an old Cheyenne hunting camp at the base of the ridge, he told them. Good water source sheltered from view. Meet there at sunset tomorrow if we get separated. And with brief nods of acknowledgement, they parted ways. 2 Rivers heading west toward rocky terrain, where tracking would be difficult, Cass striking east through the densest part of the forest, and Alder and Mirabelle turning south, staying high on the ridgeline to maintain visibility of potential pursuers. They traveled in silence for the first hour, ears straining for sounds of pursuit. Gradually the tension eased, as the forest remained quiet around them, disturbed only by natural sounds, birdsong, the rustle of small animals, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Do you think Cass is telling the truth? Mirabelle finally asked as they paused to rest beside a small stream. Alder considered before answering. About James, yes. The details align with what I know. He dipped his bandana in the cool water, using it to wipe dust from his face. About his own motivations, I'm less certain. He could have betrayed us last night, led Blackwood's men right to us. True, but he didn't. Alder offered her the damp cloth. In my experience, people rarely fit neatly into categories of good or evil. Most exist somewhere in between, doing what they think necessary to survive. Mirabelle pressed the cool bandana to her forehead, grateful for the momentary relief. James trusted him once, showed him the escape tunnel. Then perhaps we should extend some cautious trust as well. They continued their journey more rapidly, now that they were confident they weren't being followed. By midday, they had reached familiar terrain, the outskirts of Mirabelle's property. From their elevated position, they could see the charred remains of her cabin, wisps of smoke still rising from the ruins. Blackwood had been thorough. Nothing remained but the stone chimney standing like an accusing finger pointed at the sky. I'm sorry, Alder said quietly. Mirabelle straightened her shoulders. It was just a house. It was your home. Home is where Sarah is, she replied with quiet determination. And right now, that's Blackwood's estate. They circled carefully around the property, staying within the tree line to avoid being spotted by any watchers. As 2 Rivers had predicted, 2 of Blackwood's men remained near the ruins, ostensibly picking through debris, but clearly posted as sentries. The boundary oak should be about a quarter-mile east, Mirabelle whispered, orienting herself. Near the creek. They moved cautiously through the undergrowth, freezing at every snapped twig or rustled leaf. Finally, they reached the massive oak that marked the eastern boundary of the property, a giant that had stood for centuries, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like supplicating arms. This is it, Mirabelle confirmed. James showed me how to find true north from here, something about the pattern of moss on the trunk. Alder examined the tree carefully. There! He pointed to a series of small notches cut into the bark at regular intervals. To the untrained eye, they might appear to be natural damage, but Alder recognized the deliberate pattern. These are compass markings. Military surveyors use similar techniques. Following the markings, they paced out distances in different directions from the tree, searching for any sign of disturbance or human intervention. "Here," Alder called softly from the north side. "The ground's been disturbed, then carefully replaced." He knelt examining a patch of earth that to Mirabelle looked no different from the surrounding forest floor. "Recently, too, within the past year." "Blackwood," she suggested, alarmed. "No. Whoever did this was careful, respectful of the surroundings. Blackwood's men would have been less subtle." Alder began clearing away leaves and twigs, revealing a slight depression in the earth. "I think someone else knew about this place. Someone who came to check if the cache was still here." Using a small folding shovel from his pack, Alder carefully removed the top layer of soil, revealing a flat stone about 2 feet square. He pried it up, exposing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay an oilskin-wrapped package, remarkably well preserved despite its underground storage. With reverent care, Alder lifted it out and handed it to Mirabelle. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the oilskin, revealing a leather portfolio tied with faded ribbon. Inside were documents, maps, letters, a small leather-bound book similar to the coded journal Blackwood had returned to her, and most surprisingly, a sealed letter addressed in James's unmistakable handwriting, "For Mirabelle, if I do not return." "He knew," she whispered, tears threatening. "He knew he might not come back." "Open it," Alder encouraged gently. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter, James's words reaching across years and death to touch her once more. "My dearest Mirabelle, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I have not returned to you. For that I am sorrier than words can express. Know that every day away from you and Sarah has been torment justified only by the hope that my sacrifice ensures your safety. Enclosed, you will find evidence of crimes committed by Colonel Elijah Blackwood, treason, profiteering, murder. I have spent the past year documenting his activities, building an irrefutable case against a man who has betrayed every principle for which we fought. The coded journal I maintained during my service contains the key to understanding these documents. Without it, much of this evidence will remain indecipherable. Guard it well. Should harm come to me before justice can be served, I entrust this task to you. Take these documents to General Benjamin Butler in Washington. He alone has the power and integrity to act on them. I have also left a letter for Cass. Despite our differences, he is my brother, and I believe there is good in him still. Trust him only so far as necessity dictates, but know that he is not beyond redemption. Tell Sarah that her father loves her more than life itself, and that every step I have taken away from her has been with the intention of creating a world worthy of her future. And you, my love, you have been my strength, my conscience, my home. Whatever lies beyond this life, I will wait for you there, with patience and endless love. Forever yours, James Mirabelle. Pressed the letter to her heart, tears flowing freely now. Alder respectfully averted his gaze, giving her a moment of privacy with her husband's final words. He left instructions, she said, finally wiping her eyes. Evidence against Blackwood to be taken to Washington. Alder nodded. That matches what he told me at Petersburg. She shuffled through the other papers, detailed records of weapons shipments diverted from Union armories to Confederate forces, financial transactions linking Blackwood to known Confederate sympathizers, witness statements from soldiers who had observed suspicious activities. This is enough to hang Blackwood 10 times over, Alder observed, examining a ledger page. No wonder he was willing to kill to keep it hidden. James mentioned a coded journal, Mirabelle said, frowning. The one Blackwood returned to me after James's death. It's the key to making sense of all this. Which is now ash, Alder reminded her grimly. Not necessarily. She tapped the small leather book from the cache. This looks identical to the one Blackwood gave me. James was thorough. He would have made a duplicate. Hope flared as Alder examined the book. You're right. And with this, we have everything we need to destroy Blackwood. A twig snapped nearby. They froze, eyes darting to the surrounding forest. Another sound, the metallic click of a gun hammer being drawn back. I wouldn't move if I were you, came a familiar voice. Marshal Davis stepped into view, rifle aimed squarely at Alder's chest. Behind him emerged 3 more men, all armed, all wearing expressions that ranged from grim determination to outright hatred. Marshal, Mirabel acknowledged subtly, shifting to shield the documents with her body. Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Calloway. Davis kept his rifle steady. You're both wanted for questioning in connection with the assault on a train passenger and the murder of 2 of Blackwood's men last night. Those men were trying to burn us alive, Mirabel protested. Any shots fired were in self-defense. That's for a judge to decide. Davis gestured with his rifle. On your feet, hands where I can see them. Alder rose slowly, his expression unreadable. This isn't justice, Marshal. This is Blackwood using the law as his personal weapon. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Davis's face, quickly suppressed. The law's the law, Calloway. I've got my orders. Orders from a traitor, Mirabel said, standing beside Alder, the portfolio clutched to her chest. We have proof that Blackwood sold weapons to the Confederacy during the war, that he's responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Union soldiers. Davis's rifle wavered slightly. That's a serious accusation, ma'am. It's the truth, Alder affirmed. Captain James Morgan, Mirabel's husband, documented everything. That's why Blackwood had him killed. Enough talk, one of the other men growled. Blackwood wants them alive, but he didn't specify unharmed. Stand down, Jenkins, Davis ordered sharply. No one's getting hurt if they cooperate. Mirabel caught Alder's eye, a silent communication passing between them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with no hope of escape. But the evidence, James's sacrifice, had to be preserved. We'll come peacefully, she said finally, on one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions, Mrs. Morgan, Davis replied, though his tone lacked conviction. This portfolio contains evidence of treason, she continued steadily. Evidence that implicates one of the most powerful men in the territory. If you take us to Blackwood, it will disappear, and with it, any chance of justice. What exactly are you proposing? Davis asked, curiosity overtaking caution. Take us to Dr. Abernathy in redemption, Alder suggested. Hold us there under guard while you examine the evidence. If you find nothing compelling, proceed as Blackwood wishes. But if what we're saying is true... Davis studied them for a long moment, internal conflict evident on his weathered face. A former soldier himself, he had never fully acclimated to the morally ambiguous role of frontier lawman. Jenkins, he finally said, ride ahead to redemption. Tell Dr. Abernathy to expect prisoners. But Blackwood said, I know what Blackwood said, Davis snapped. But I'm still the law in this territory, and I'll proceed as I see fit. Jenkins departed with obvious reluctance. Davis and the remaining men disarmed Alder and Mirabel, though they handled them with reasonable care. The portfolio was confiscated, Davis placing it in his own saddlebag rather than entrusting it to his deputies. I hope for your sakes this evidence is as compelling as you claim, he told them quietly as they began the march to town. Because Blackwood won't take kindly to this delay. Read the documents yourself, Marshal, Mirabel urged. See the truth with your own eyes. As they crested a hill overlooking Redemption, Mirabel's heart sank. In the town square, a substantial crowd had gathered. At its center stood a hastily constructed gallows. "What's happening?" she asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Davis's expression darkened. "Blackwood's called a town meeting, said he had justice to deliver." "For us?" Alder questioned, eyeing the ominous structure. "No," Davis replied grimly. "For the conspirators who helped you escape." Realization struck like physical pain. "Cass and Two Rivers," Mirabel whispered. "They've been captured." From their elevated position they could see two figures being led to the gallows, hands bound behind them. One was definitely Cass, his distinctive slouch unmistakable even at this distance. The other, standing proudly despite his bonds, could only be Two Rivers. And overseeing it all, resplendent in a black frock coat, like some self-appointed judge, stood Elijah Blackwood. Beside him, dressed in a pale blue gown that caught the afternoon sunlight, was a young woman whose posture and profile sent a jolt of recognition through Mirabel's body. "Sarah." She breathed her daughter's name, a prayer and a plea. "We have to stop them," Mirabel whispered, staring in horror at the gallows where Cass and Two Rivers stood, surrounded by Blackwood's men. Marshal Davis frowned, clearly torn between duty and conscience. "Mrs. Morgan, there's a legal process. There's nothing legal about this." Alder cut in, his voice low and urgent. "That's a lynch mob, not a court." Below in the town square, Blackwood stood on a raised platform, addressing the gathered crowd. Even from this distance, his commanding presence was evident, as he gestured dramatically, whipping the townspeople into a frenzy. "Make a choice, Marshal," Alder pressed. "What side of history do you want to stand on?" Davis studied the documents in his hands, then looked back at the scene unfolding in Redemption. "Follow me," he said finally, "and stay low." He led them down a game trail that circled around the town's eastern edge, avoiding the main road. As they drew closer, Blackwood's voice carried to them on the afternoon breeze. "Harboring dangerous fugitives, men who have attacked honest citizens, destroyed property, and threatened the very peace we've worked so hard to establish in Redemption." A murmur ran through the crowd, not entirely supportive, Mirabel noted with a flicker of hope. Not everyone was convinced by Blackwood's performance. "These men," Blackwood continued, gesturing to the bound prisoners, "conspired to conceal the whereabouts of known criminals. Their actions have endangered every man, woman, and child in this community." Davis guided them to the rear of Dr. Abernathy's clinic, tapping softly on the back door. It opened almost immediately, revealing the doctor's concerned face. "Marshal, what in God's name is happening out there?" Abernathy's eyes widened when he saw Mirabel and Alder. "Mrs. Morgan, we thought you were dead. Not yet." She pushed past him into the clinic. "But Cass and Two Rivers will be if we don't act quickly." Abernathy secured the door behind them. "Blackwood's gone mad. He rode in at dawn with those two in custody, declared martial law, and ordered the gallows constructed. The town council tried to intervene, but his men are armed and numerous." "He's desperate," Alder observed. "He knows we have evidence against him." Davis placed the portfolio on Abernathy's examination table. "Evidence I've been reviewing. If even half of what's in here is true, Blackwood should be the one on that gallows." Mirabel moved to the clinic's front window, carefully peering through the curtains. From this angle, she could see Sarah clearly, for the first time her daughter alive, and grown beautiful despite the solemn expression on her face. She stood slightly apart from Blackwood, her posture suggesting reluctance rather than enthusiasm for the proceedings. "My daughter," Mirabelle whispered, drinking in the sight of the child she'd thought lost forever. He's making her watch this barbarity. She may not understand what's happening, Abernathy said gently. Blackwood has told everyone she suffers from memory loss following a childhood illness. She's rarely allowed to speak to anyone without his supervision. Alder joined Mirabelle at the window. The crowd's restless. Some are arguing with Blackwood's men. We might have allies out there. We need more than allies, Davis said grimly. We need a plan. I have one, came a voice from the back of the clinic. All heads turned to see Martha, Dr. Abernathy's young assistant, emerging from a supply closet. She straightened her apron with dignity, meeting their surprised stares with determination. "Begging your pardon, but I couldn't help overhearing," she said. "And I think I can help." "Martha." Abernathy began cautiously, "This is a dangerous situation." "Which is why you need someone they won't suspect," she insisted. "I can move through that crowd without drawing attention. Colored women are invisible to men like Blackwood." Alder's expression showed grudging respect. "What do you propose?" "Dr. Abernathy's been teaching me about medicines," Martha explained, "including the ones that cause a powerful sleeping effect. If I could get close enough to spike the water barrel the guards are drinking from—" "Too risky," Davis objected. "But possible," Alder countered, considering the idea. "A distraction at the right moment could give Martha the opening she needs." Outside, Blackwood's speech reached a crescendo. "Justice demands swift action. These men have forfeited their right to a formal trial through their treasonous acts." "We're out of time," Mirabelle said urgently. Abernathy moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small brown bottle. "Laudanum," he explained, handing it to Martha. "A few drops per man should be sufficient. Too much could be fatal." Martha nodded solemnly, tucking the bottle into her pocket. "I'll create a distraction," Davis decided. "As town marshal, I can at least demand to inspect the proceedings." "And I'm coming with you," Mirabelle declared. "Absolutely not," Alder and Davis said in unison. "My daughter is out there," she insisted, her voice steely, "and I've been hiding long enough." Before anyone could stop her, Mirabelle strode to the door. Alder caught her arm, his expression grave. "If you go out there, Blackwood will recognize you immediately," he warned. "I'm counting on it," she replied. "His obsession with me might be the only thing that can save Cass and Two Rivers." Abernathy cleared his throat. "If you're determined to do this, at least go prepared." He pressed a small derringer into her hand. "One shot. Make it count." Davis sighed heavily. "I must be losing my mind." He checked his own weapon. "Alder, you stay here with the evidence. If this goes sideways, get it to the territorial governor in Cheyenne." Alder's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, all of you." Martha slipped out first, using the back alleys to circle around to the square. Davis and Mirabelle waited several minutes before following, walking openly down the main street toward the growing commotion. As they approached, Mirabelle felt a curious calm settle over her. 5 years of grief and fear had crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. Whether she lived or died today, she would face Blackwood as an equal, not a victim. The crowd parted instinctively for Davis, his marshal's badge commanding respect even in this lawless moment. Whispers followed their progress, the town marshal and the mad widow approaching the gallows like characters from some frontier morality play. Blackwood spotted them when they were halfway across the square. His rhetoric faltered mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Marshal Davis," he recovered smoothly. "How good of you to join us. I was beginning to wonder where the law was in this lawless hour." "I might ask the same question, Colonel," Davis replied. his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed gathering. "Since when does a private citizen order executions in my jurisdiction?" Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. These men were caught harboring dangerous fugitives. "Then they should be tried in a proper court," Davis countered, "not strung up to satisfy your personal vendetta." Mirabel stepped forward, her gaze fixed not on Blackwood, but on Sarah, who stood frozen on the platform staring at this unexpected arrival with confused recognition. "Hello, Sarah," Mirabel said softly. A ripple of confused murmurs passed through the crowd. Sarah's eyes widened, her hand moving unconsciously to her throat, where a locket James's gift on her 8th birthday still hung. "Mrs. Morgan," Blackwood cut in, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "we all thought you perished in that unfortunate fire. How providential that you've survived." "Yes, isn't it?" Mirabel replied, not breaking eye contact with her daughter. "Almost as providential as Sarah surviving the flood 3 years ago." Sarah took a half-step forward. "Do I know you?" "Enough," Blackwood snapped, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her back. "The girl is confused. Her mind was damaged in childhood." "Her mind is fine," Mirabel declared, raising her voice to address the crowd. "What's damaged is the truth. This man has lied to all of you. Sarah isn't his ward or distant relative. She's my daughter, presumed drowned 3 years ago, but actually taken by Blackwood as leverage against me." The townspeople's murmurs grew louder, more concerned. Blackwood's men shifted nervously, hands moving to weapons. "Marshal," Blackwood said dangerously, "I suggest you remove this disturbed woman before she disrupts these proceedings further." "I'm not going anywhere," Mirabel stated firmly. "Not without my daughter and the truth." From the gallows platform, Cass spoke up for the first time. "She's right. Blackwood has been lying to all of you. He murdered her husband, my brother, to cover up his crimes during the war." "Silence him," Blackwood ordered. One of his men struck Cass with a rifle butt, sending him to his knees. Two Rivers remained stoic, his dark eyes scanning the crowd, likely searching for potential allies or escape routes. Mirabel noticed Martha moving quietly around the perimeter, approaching the water barrel near the guards. "What crimes exactly?" Davis asked loudly, maintaining the distraction. "Treason," Mirabel answered. "Selling weapons to Confederate forces while serving as a Union officer. Profiting from the deaths of the very men he commanded." Blackwood's face darkened with fury. "These are baseless accusations from a woman who has clearly lost her mind with grief." "They're documented facts," Davis countered, producing one of the ledger pages from his coat. "Captain James Morgan, Mrs. Morgan's husband and my former commanding officer, compiled extensive evidence before his murder." A shocked silence fell over the square. Even Blackwood's men exchanged uncertain glances. Sarah stared at Mirabel with growing awareness, fragments of memory visibly struggling to surface. "Mother," she whispered the word, barely audible. Blackwood's control snapped. "Enough of this farce." He drew his pistol, aiming directly at Mirabel. "I will not stand here and be slandered by a mad woman and a corrupt marshal." Davis moved to draw his own weapon, but Blackwood's men were faster, training their rifles on him. "Drop your gun, Marshal," Blackwood commanded. "Or Mrs. Morgan dies where she stands." Davis hesitated, then slowly placed his revolver on the ground. Mirabel felt the weight of the Derringer in her pocket, but knew one shot would accomplish nothing except her own death. "Now," Blackwood continued, a triumphant smile spreading across his features, "we can proceed with justice as planned. and add 2 more criminals to today's accounting. At that moment, several things happened simultaneously. From the edge of the crowd, Dr. Abernathy stepped forward, addressing the townspeople with the moral authority his position afforded him. "Citizens of redemption, will you stand by while innocent people are murdered in broad daylight?" Taking advantage of the distraction, Martha emptied the laudanum bottle into the water barrel, then melted back into the crowd. And most dramatically, a rifle shot cracked through the air, sending Blackwood's hat flying from his head. All eyes turned to the source, Alder Calloway, standing atop Dr. Abernathy's clinic roof, James's Springfield rifle aimed squarely at Blackwood. "The next one goes between your eyes, Colonel," Alder called out, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the square. "Unless you order your men to stand down." Blackwood's face contorted with rage and recognition. "Calloway, the murdering Negro who's been poisoning this town against me, the man whose family you murdered," Alder corrected calmly, not lowering the rifle. "One of many victims of your greed and treachery." The standoff stretched taut, as a bowstring neither side willing to yield. Blackwood still held his pistol on Mirabelle, while Alder's rifle remained trained on Blackwood. Around them, the crowd had backed away, creating an empty circle of tension. "You can't kill all of us," Blackwood sneered. "My men will cut you down the moment you fire." "Perhaps," Alder acknowledged, "but you'll be the first to die. Are you prepared to make that sacrifice, Colonel?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's face. Like many bullies, his courage faltered when faced with personal risk. Seizing the moment, Sarah suddenly wrenched free of Blackwood's grasp. "I remember," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I remember the flood, the cold water. And I remember you finding me on the riverbank." She turned to the crowd. "He told me my mother was dead, made me call him Uncle Elijah, and threatened to put me in an asylum if I ever questioned him." Blackwood grabbed for her, but Sarah evaded his grasp, moving to the edge of the platform. "He kept me prisoner in that mansion, watching everything I said or did. And when I started remembering things, my real home, my real mother, he gave me medicine that made everything foggy again." The tide of public opinion visibly shifted. Even Blackwood's men seemed uncomfortable, several lowering their weapons slightly. Marshal Davis seized the opportunity, addressing the armed men directly. "You all took an oath to uphold the law, not to serve one man's corrupt agenda. I'm the legal authority in this territory, and I'm ordering you to stand down." One by one, Blackwood's men began to waver, looking to each other for guidance. Martha's laudanum was taking effect on those who had drunk from the water barrel, their movements becoming sluggish, their attention wandering. Blackwood, sensing his control slipping away, made a desperate gambit. He lunged for Sarah, grabbing her roughly and pressing his pistol to her temple. "Back away!" he shouted. "All of you, or the girl dies right here." Mirabelle's blood froze. After coming so close to reuniting with her daughter, to lose her now would be unbearable. She caught Sarah's eye, trying to communicate courage and love across the space between them. "It's all right, Sarah," she called. "Be brave, my darling." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. In that silent exchange, something profound passed between them. A recognition. A reunion of souls separated too long. On the gallows, Two Rivers had been working methodically at his bonds, using the distraction to his advantage. Now, with a swift, powerful movement, he broke free, immediately turning to release Cass. Blackwood saw the movement and swung his pistol toward the escaping prisoners. In that instant of divided attention, Sarah drove her elbow hard into his ribs and tore away from his grasp. Mirabelle didn't hesitate. She pulled the Derringer from her pocket and fired her one shot not at Blackwood, but at the rope holding the gallows trapdoor mechanism. The rope split, the mechanism released, and the wooden platform beneath Blackwood collapsed, sending him crashing through. Chaos erupted. Townspeople scattered. Blackwood's men, confused and increasingly affected by the drugged water, failed to mount an organized response. Alder fired a second shot, deliberately striking the platform near Blackwood, splintering wood and further disorienting him. Sarah ran to Mirabel, who caught her daughter in a fierce embrace, 5 years of grief dissolving in the miracle of reunion. "Mother," Sarah sobbed against her shoulder, "I knew you'd come. Somehow I knew." "I never stopped looking for you," Mirabel whispered, holding her daughter as if she might vanish again at any moment. "Never stopped loving you." Their reunion was cut short by Davis's urgent command. "Get to the clinic now." Blackwood had recovered enough to pull himself from the broken gallows, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, murderous rage in his eyes. He fired wildly at Alder, the shot going wide as Two Rivers tackled him from behind. Mirabel pulled Sarah toward the clinic where Abernathy stood holding the door open. Once inside, she turned back to see Alder leaping from the roof to join the fray, while Cass and Two Rivers struggled with Blackwood and his remaining loyal men. "We need to get the evidence to safety," Abernathy urged, gathering the portfolio. "If anything happens to these documents, Blackwood might still escape justice." "I'm not leaving without Alder," Mirabel insisted. "Or Uncle Cass," Sarah added, surprising her mother. "Uncle Cass? He used to sneak me books when Blackwood wasn't looking," Sarah explained. "Left notes telling me not to give up hope. I think he was trying to help in his own way." Another layer of complexity to the brother-in-law Mirabel had long considered an enemy. She peered through the window, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene outside. The tide had turned against Blackwood. Several townspeople had joined Cass and Two Rivers, while others had disarmed the drugged guards. Alder was engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle with two of Blackwood's more loyal men, his military training evident in his disciplined movements. But Blackwood himself had disappeared from view. "Where did he go?" Mirabel whispered, scanning the square anxiously. Her answer came with the crash of the clinic's back door being kicked open. Blackwood stood in the doorway, blood streaming down his face, pistol raised. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, advancing into the room. "Years of work, reputation, power, all destroyed because you couldn't leave well enough alone." "No." The word tore from Mirabel's throat before she could stop herself. Blackwood whirled his face, a mask of madness in the flickering matchlight. Blood streaked his features from injuries sustained in his escape, and his once immaculate clothing hung in tatters. But the gun in his hand was steady as he aimed it at Mirabel. "Mrs. Morgan," he sneered, rising from his crouch. "How predictable. I knew you'd come running to your husband's grave like a faithful dog." Mirabel pushed Sarah behind her, keeping her eyes fixed on Blackwood. "Step away from him," she commanded, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. Blackwood laughed, the sound brittle and wild. "Or what, you'll shoot me with your non-existent weapon." He gestured contemptuously at the wooden marker. "Your precious James can't help you now. Soon there'll be nothing left of him or his meddling legacy." At his feet lay kindling and a small canister of kerosene, clear evidence of his intention to desecrate James's final resting place and destroy any remaining evidence hidden there. "You've lost Blackwood," Mirabel stated calmly. "The town knows what you are. The evidence is already on its way to Cheyenne." "Lies," he spat, though uncertainty flickered briefly in his eyes. "You wouldn't have come here if you didn't need something hidden at this grave." "I came to say goodbye," she replied simply. "To the husband you took from me, the father you stole from Sarah, At the mention of Sarah, Blackwood's gaze shifted, noticing the girl for the first time. His expression changed, calculating greed, replacing mindless rage. "Sarah," he called, his voice suddenly gentle, cajoling. "Come here, child. This woman is confused. Remember who raised you, educated. You gave you everything." "Kidnapped me," Sarah corrected, stepping out from behind her mother, her young face set with determination. "Made me believe my mother was dead. Drugged me when I started remembering." Blackwood's false benevolence vanished like morning mist. "Ungrateful brat! I saved you from a life of backwoods ignorance, made you a lady instead of some frontier savage." "You made me a prisoner," Sarah replied, her composure remarkable for her age. "Nothing more." Rage contorted Blackwood's features. "Enough of this sentimentality. The evidence, Mrs. Morgan, now, or I start with the girl and end with you." Mirabel's mind raced. The portfolio containing James's evidence was secured against her body, but Blackwood clearly believed additional documents were hidden at the grave site. This misunderstanding might be their only advantage. "There's nothing here," she said steadily. "Just a husband's final resting place. Whatever you're looking for is gone." "You're lying," Blackwood snarled, taking a threatening step forward. "Morgan was too clever to keep all his evidence in one place. There's a second cash ledger's witness statements enough to hang me 10 times over, and it's here." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. Blackwood pivoted, firing a wild shot into the trees. "Who's there? Show yourself." Silence answered him, but Mirabel sensed they were no longer alone. Alder, Two Rivers, perhaps others allies moving stealthily through the night. She needed to keep Blackwood distracted, give them time to position themselves. "James was always one step ahead of you," she said, deliberately provocative. "Even in death, he outmaneuvered you." "A minor officer with delusions of moral superiority," Blackwood sneered. "He was nothing." "He was everything you pretend to be," Mirabel countered. "A true leader, a man of principle, beloved by his men." Blackwood's face twisted with hatred. "His principles were treason, equality for niggers and savages, the destruction of natural order. He betrayed his race, his class, his birthright." "He honored his oath to the Union," Mirabel replied calmly. "Unlike you, who profited from selling arms to the enemy. How many Union boys died because of your greed? Colonel, hundreds, thousands. Casualties of war." Blackwood dismissed with a wave of his gun. "Meaningless in the grand scheme. I was building a future, my future, while fools like your husband wasted their lives on lost causes." "And yet, here you are," Mirabel observed. "Defeated, hunted, reduced to desecrating graves, while the niggers and savages you despise close in around you." Blackwood's control snapped. With an inarticulate cry of rage, he lunged toward Mirabel, gun raised for a killing blow rather than a shot. Sarah screamed. Mirabel braced for impact, but the blow never landed. A massive shadow detached itself from the darkness behind the oak tree, intercepting Blackwood mid-lunge. Alder Calloway, moving with the power and precision that had kept him alive through war and persecution, caught Blackwood's gun arm and twisted. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air before falling from Blackwood's grasp. "You?" Blackwood gasped, recognition and fear warring in his eyes. "Me?" Alder confirmed grimly, maintaining his iron grip on the struggling man. "The ghost you created when you murdered my family." Two Rivers emerged from the shadows on the opposite side of the clearing, rifle aimed steadily at Blackwood. "It's over, Colonel," he stated flatly. "Surrender or die. Your choice." For a moment, it seemed Blackwood might choose death. His eyes darted wildly between his captors, calculating odds, seeking escape. Then his shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. "Very well," he sighed. "You've won this round." Alder cautiously relaxed his grip, preparing to secure Blackwood's wrists. It was the opening the desperate man had been waiting for. With surprising strength, born of desperation, Blackwood wrenched free, snatching a knife from his boot in the same fluid motion. The blade flashed in the moonlight as he slashed at Alder, who barely avoided the killing stroke. Blackwood's momentum carried him forward directly toward Sarah, who stood frozen in shock. "No!" Marable cried, throwing herself between her daughter and Blackwood. The knife plunged into her shoulder, white-hot pain exploding through her body. She heard Sarah's scream, felt warm blood soaking her dress. Through a haze of pain, she saw Alder's expression transform from shock to cold fury. What happened next unfolded with the inexorable logic of justice, long delayed. Alder's massive fist connected with Blackwood's jaw, sending the smaller man staggering backward. Two Rivers moved with the fluid grace of a lifetime hunter, sweeping Blackwood's legs from under him. Blackwood fell hard, the back of his head striking the corner of James's grave marker with a sickening crack. He lay still, blood pooling beneath him, eyes open, but unseeing. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Two Rivers knelt, checking for signs of life. "Dead," he announced without emotion. His own hatred killed him in the end. Alder was already at Mirabel's side, easing her to the ground, examining her wound with gentle, competent hands. "Not deep," he assessed, relief evident in his voice, "but it needs tending." "Sarah," Mirabel gasped, fighting against encroaching darkness. "I'm here, Mother," her daughter assured her, kneeling beside her, clasping her hand. "I'm safe. We're all safe now." As consciousness faded, Mirabel found her gaze drawn to James's grave, the simple marker that had withstood Blackwood's final attempt at destruction. In the ghostly moonlight, she could almost imagine her husband standing there, finally at peace. "It's over," she whispered, though whether to James or herself she couldn't say. Then, darkness claimed her. Mirabel awoke to the gentle crackle of a campfire and the scent of pine. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place herself, couldn't remember how she'd come to be lying beneath a blanket beside a small fire in what appeared to be a forest clearing. Then, memory returned. Blackwood, the knife, the sickening sound of his head striking James's grave marker. She tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her shoulder. "Easy," came Alder's deep voice from nearby. "The wound isn't life-threatening, but you lost blood." He moved into her field of vision, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. Behind him, she could make out Two Rivers sitting on the far side of the fire, keeping watch, while Sarah slept peacefully nearby, wrapped in a blanket. "Blackwood," Mirabel whispered. "Still dead," Alder confirmed grimly. "We buried him away from here. James deserved better company in eternity." She nodded, grateful for this final respect shown to her husband. "The town, settling. Davis has restored order. Blackwood's remaining men have either surrendered or fled." Alder offered her a canteen. "The evidence is safe. Two Rivers will take it to Cheyenne at first light." Mirabel drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "And Cass?" A shadow crossed Alder's face. "Wounded in the fighting. Dr. Abernathy is tending him at the clinic. He's expected to recover." "He saved us," Mirabel said softly. "Held off Blackwood's men so we could escape." "He has much to atone for," Alder acknowledged. "But it seems he's made a start." Mirabel's gaze drifted to her sleeping daughter, a sight she had despaired of ever seeing again. "I still can't believe she's really here." "She's remarkable," Alder said with genuine admiration. "Strong like her mother." "And her father," Mirabel added, looking toward James's grave, now illuminated by the gentle glow of dawn breaking through the trees. "I wish he could have seen her grow up." Alder followed her gaze. "In a way, perhaps he has." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in gold and amber. The boundary oak stood sentinel, its ancient branches seeming to embrace the small grave at its base. For the first time in years, Mirabel felt a sense of peace in this place, as if some long unsettled account had finally been balanced. "What will you do now?" Alder asked eventually. It was the question she'd been asking herself through the long night of unconsciousness. With Blackwood dead, Sarah restored, and James's killer brought to justice, the driving purpose that had sustained her these past days was fulfilled. "What remained, rebuild, I suppose," she said thoughtfully. "The cabin is gone, but the land remains. Sarah will need a home. It won't be easy. Winter's coming, and building takes time." "We've overcome worse," Mirabel replied with quiet confidence. "And we're not without friends, it seems." Alder nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The town might see you differently now. Blackwood's deceptions have been exposed. People will know the truth about what happened to Sarah, about your husband's heroism." "Truth is a powerful foundation," she agreed. "Better than the lies we've all been living with." Two Rivers approached, having spotted movement on the trail below. "Riders coming," he reported. "Davis and some townspeople." Soon the clearing was filled with activity as Davis arrived with a wagon, several men from town, and Dr. Abernathy, who immediately set about properly treating Mirabel's wound. "Cass told us where to find you," Davis explained. "He was worried when you didn't return." "How is he?" Mirabel asked. "Stubborn," Abernathy replied with a hint of professional exasperation. "Refusing to rest, despite losing enough blood to fill a wash basin." He secured a fresh bandage around Mirabel's shoulder. "Rather like his sister-in-law, it seems." The observation, so casually linking her to James's family, stirred something unexpected in Mirabel's heart. For years she had thought of Cass as an adversary, an unwelcome reminder of the husband she'd lost. Now, like so much else in her life, that relationship stood to be redefined. With gentle insistence, Abernathy helped Mirabel into the wagon. Sarah climbed in beside her, resting her head on her mother's uninjured shoulder with the natural ease of a child coming home after a long absence. "Where to, Mrs. Morgan?" Davis asked, reins in hand. She considered. The cabin was gone, reduced to ashes and charred timbers. There was nowhere to return to. "The clinic, I suppose," she said reluctantly. "Until we decide what's next." "If I may make a suggestion." Two Rivers interjected, his usually stoic expression softening slightly. "My people have a winter camp in the sheltered valley beyond this ridge. There would be room for you there until spring." The offer surprised her. Two Rivers, like many native people, had ample reason to distrust whites after decades of broken promises and encroachment on their lands. That he would extend hospitality to her, and Sarah spoke volumes about his character and perhaps about James's influence during their wartime friendship. "That's very generous," she began, "but I wouldn't want to impose—" "It's not an imposition." Two Rivers cut in firmly. "It's what James would have wanted. He spoke often of you during the war, of your shared vision for this land. A place where people might live according to their character rather than their color or origin." Alder, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. "Two Rivers people know how to survive harsh winters better than anyone. Sarah would be safe there, well cared for, while you heal. The practicality of the suggestion was undeniable. With winter approaching and no shelter of her own, Mirabelle had few options. And perhaps there was wisdom in removing Sarah temporarily from redemption, giving the girl time to recover from her ordeal, away from curious eyes and painful reminders. "Thank you," she said finally. "We accept your hospitality with gratitude." Two Rivers nodded once the matter settled. "And you, Alder?" Davis asked. "What are your plans now that Blackwood is gone?" It was the question Mirabelle had been avoiding, afraid of the answer. With his quest for justice fulfilled, what reason did Alder Calloway have to remain in Wyoming territory? A man of his skills and integrity could find work anywhere far from the memories of violence and loss that this place must hold for him. Alder seemed equally reluctant to answer, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I haven't decided," he said finally. "There's still much to be done here." "You'd be welcome in Redemption," Davis offered. "Town could use a man with carpentry skills. Plenty of rebuilding to do after last night's fires." "I'll consider it," Alder replied noncommittally. As they prepared to depart, Mirabelle found herself at James's grave one last time, a moment of private farewell. She knelt beside the simple marker, her fingers tracing the rough-hewn letters of his name. "You were right," she whispered. "About so many things. About the world you tried to build, the one I'll keep building in your memory." She placed a kiss on the weathered wood. "Rest easy, my love. Your fight is finished." Rising, she turned to find Alder waiting respectfully at a distance. "Ready?" he asked gently. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it true. For the first time in years, she felt ready to move forward, to build, rather than merely survive. The winter camp of Two Rivers people nestled in a sheltered valley, protected from harsh winds by towering cliffs on three sides. A dozen lodges formed a rough circle around a central fire pit, with larger communal structures for cooking and ceremonies positioned at the northern edge of the camp. Mirabelle and Sarah were given a small lodge of their own, the interior surprisingly warm and comfortable despite its simplicity. The women of the camp provided clothing better suited to the approaching winter, while the children immediately adopted Sarah as a playmate, their acceptance uncomplicated by adult prejudices. During those first weeks, Mirabelle focused on healing both her physical wound and the deeper injuries of grief and separation. She watched with joy as Sarah blossomed, the artificial refinement Blackwood had imposed, gradually giving way to natural childish exuberance. The girl learned to ride properly, to identify edible plants, to speak a few words in the Choctaw language Two Rivers people shared. Alder visited regularly, riding from Redemption, where he had taken up temporary residence at Davis's invitation. He brought news of the town's recovery, of Cass's improving health, of the territorial governor's formal commendation for those who had exposed Blackwood's crimes. "They're calling James a hero in the territorial papers," he reported one crisp afternoon as he and Mirabelle walked along the frozen creek that bordered the camp. "The full story has come out at his undercover work gathering evidence, his efforts to protect you and Sarah." "He would have hated the attention," Mirabelle observed with a sad smile. "James never sought recognition, only results." "A rare quality in any man," Alder agreed. "But the story serves a purpose. It's forcing a reckoning throughout the territory with men like Blackwood, former officers who used the chaos of war and Reconstruction to build personal empires." They walked in companionable silence for a time, their breath forming small clouds in the winter air. Alder had changed subtly in the weeks since Blackwood's death, Mirabelle noted. The constant vigilance, the tightly coiled readiness for violence that had characterized him during their flight from Blackwood had eased. He moved more freely, laughed more readily, particularly with Sarah, who had developed an unmistakable case of hero worship for the giant who had helped rescue her. "I've been thinking," Alder said, finally breaking the silence, "about your cabin, about rebuilding in the spring." "Oh," Mirabel prompted, something hopeful fluttering in her chest. "I drew up some plans." He produced a folded paper from his coat. "Nothing elaborate, but solid. Larger than your old place, with proper bedrooms for you and Sarah. A study where she could continue her education." Mirabel examined the drawings with growing emotion. The design was indeed simple but thoughtful. A sturdy two-story home with a covered porch wrapping around three sides, large windows to capture light and views, a stone fireplace positioned to warm the entire structure efficiently. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but more ambitious than I had imagined. I'm not sure I could afford—" "The town wants to help," Alder interrupted gently. "Davis Abernathy, others, who regret how they treated you all these years, they've offered materials labor." "Why would they do that?" "Redemption," Alder said simply. "They're trying to live up to the town's name." Mirabel traced the lines of the drawing, imagining the home it represented, not just a shelter, but a statement of permanence, of faith in the future. "And you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Would you help build it?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Alder studied her face, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I would," he said finally, "if you wanted me to." "And after it was built?" His gaze dropped to the frozen creek, then back to her face. "That would depend on what you wanted, Mirabel." The directness of his answer, the honesty of it, sent warmth spreading through her despite the winter chill. 5 years a widow, she had never imagined feeling this again, this tentative opening toward possibility, toward a future shared rather than endured alone. "I think," she said carefully, "that Sarah would benefit from having someone like you in her life. Someone strong, principled. Someone who understands what it means to lose everything and build again." "And you," he pressed gently. "What would benefit you, Mirabel?" The question deserved honesty, however difficult. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "James will always be part of me. But I'm beginning to understand that honoring his memory doesn't mean living forever in his shadow." She met Alder's gaze directly. "I would like the chance to discover what might be possible between us, given time." Something eased in Alder's expression, a tension he perhaps hadn't realized he was carrying. "Time is something I can offer," he said simply, "along with respect for what came before." They continued walking slightly closer now, their hands occasionally brushing as if testing the possibility of connection. Around them, the winter landscape gleamed pristine in the afternoon sun, harsh in its beauty, but alive with promise beneath the snow. Spring came to Wyoming territory in fits and starts, warm days that coaxed crocuses from the earth, followed by sudden snow squalls that blanketed the emerging growth. By April, however, the thaw had firmly taken hold, transforming the frozen creek beside Two Rivers Camp into a cheerful, bubbling stream and dotting the valley with wildflowers. The day Mirabel and Sarah prepared to return to their land dawned clear and mild, the sky an impossible blue rarely seen in eastern cities. Two Rivers people gathered to bid them farewell, offering gifts to mark the conclusion of their winter hospitality: a hand-woven blanket for Sarah, a medicine pouch for Mirabel containing herbs and remedies. "You will always have friends here," Two Rivers told them as they mounted the horses Davis had sent from town. "This land has known too much division. Perhaps now it can know some healing." The ride to Redemption took most of the day, the trail still muddy from spring rains. As they crested the final ridge, Mirabelle was struck by how much had changed in the months since Blackwood's death. The town had rebuilt from the fires, several new structures rising where damage had been worst. And beyond the town on her own property, activity was visible even from a distance, men working the frame of a new building already taking shape against the backdrop of mountains. "They've started without us," Sarah observed, spurring her pony forward in excitement. Mirabelle followed more slowly, emotion tightening her throat as the scene came into clearer view. At least a dozen men worked on the construction site. Townspeople, she recognized a few of Two Rivers' people. And at the center of the activity, directing the placement of a massive support beam, the unmistakable figure of Alder Calloway. He spotted them first, raising a hand in greeting before making his way through the organized chaos to meet them at the edge of the property. "You're early," he said by way of greeting, though his smile conveyed genuine pleasure at their arrival. "We wanted to have the frame completed before you returned." "It seems you're well on your way," Mirabelle observed, taking in the progress with amazement. The foundation was complete, the first floor framed with work beginning on the second story. "We've had good weather and willing hands," Alder replied modestly. From the direction of town, another rider approached Cass, still moving stiffly from his injuries, but clearly recovering. He dismounted carefully, approaching Mirabelle and Sarah with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Welcome home," he said awkwardly. "Such as it is at the moment." Sarah, less burdened by the complicated history between the adults, greeted her uncle with enthusiasm. "The house looks wonderful. Is that my room up there with the window facing the mountains?" "It is," Cass confirmed, relaxing slightly in the face of her acceptance. "Alder thought you'd appreciate the view." Mirabelle studied her brother-in-law, noting the changes in him. Sobriety agreed with him, as did purpose. Davis had appointed him deputy marshal, a position that seemed to have given him a structure he'd lacked since the war's end. "Thank you for your part in this," she said, simply gesturing toward the construction. Cass shrugged uncomfortably. "Least I could do after everything." A call from the building site drew Alder's attention. "Excuse me," he said. "Seems there's some disagreement about the placement of the chimney stones." As he strode back to mediate the dispute, Mirabelle found herself watching him with a warmth that had grown steadily through the winter months. His visits to the camp had become a highlight for both her and Sarah, his steadiness a foundation they had come to rely upon. "He's a good man," Cass observed, following her gaze. "Better than most of us deserve." "Yes," she agreed simply. "He is." James would have approved, Cass added the statement, clearly costing him effort. "Of him. Of all this." The mention of James, offered without bitterness or manipulation, caught Mirabelle by surprise. "You think so? I know so. My brother always wanted you to be happy, even if—" Cass trailed off, then tried again. "Even if I didn't always understand that." It was as close to an apology as Cass Morgan was likely to offer, and Mirabelle accepted it for what it was, an olive branch, a step toward healing the rift that had existed between them since James's death. "There's work to be done," she said, changing the subject to spare them both further emotional exposure. "I should see where Sarah and I can be useful." The remainder of the day passed in productive activity. Mirabelle and Sarah quickly incorporated into the building effort. By sunset, when the workers departed for town or made camp nearby, significant progress had been achieved. The second floor was fully framed, the massive stone chimney nearly complete, the outline of the wraparound porch clearly defined. Alder built a small fire near what would become the front entrance, and the four of them, Mirabelle, Sarah, Alder, and Cass, shared a simple meal as darkness fell. Sarah exhausted from the journey, and excitement soon dozed off, wrapped in the new blanket from Two Rivers' people. We'll have a roof within the week, Alder informed them, pouring coffee from a battered pot. Floors and walls shortly after. You could be moved in before May weather permitting. It's remarkable, Mirabel marveled. I never expected such progress. People want to make amends, Cass explained, for believing Blackwood's lies about you, about James, and for their own complicity, Alder added. Many knew something wasn't right about Blackwood, about how he operated. They chose to look away because confronting it seemed too difficult. And now? Mirabel asked. Now they're choosing differently, Alder replied simply. As are we all. Cass excused himself soon after riding back to town with a promise to return the following day. Mirabel and Alder sat in companionable silence by the fire, Sarah sleeping peacefully nearby. I visited James today, Alder said finally, before you arrived. Wanted to let him know his family was coming home. The simple statement offered without pretense or calculation touched Mirabel deeply. Thank you. That would have meant a great deal to him. He was there in a way, Alder continued thoughtfully, in how the men from town spoke of him as they worked, in how Two Rivers people honored his memory in Sarah's eyes when she saw the house taking shape on the land he chose. And in you, Mirabel added softly, in how you've protected what he valued most. Alder met her gaze across the fire, something vulnerable in his expression. I've been thinking about what you said before winter, about time and possibilities. As have I, she acknowledged. And Mirabel considered her answer carefully. The months at Two Rivers Camp had given her space to grieve properly, to understand the complex legacy of her life with James, and to recognize the unexpected gift that had come in the form of this extraordinary man sitting across from her. I think, she said finally, that life rarely gives us second chances. When it does, only a fool would turn away out of fear or misplaced loyalty to the past. Alder's expression remained steady, but she saw hope kindle in his eyes. Are you saying? I'm saying I would like you to stay, Alder. Not just to finish building the house, but to help make it a home. She paused, gathering courage. For all of us. He studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he reached across the space between them, his large hand engulfing hers with gentle strength. I'd be honored, he said simply. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, witnesses to this quiet commitment between two people who had lost everything and found unexpected renewal in each other. Behind them stood the frame of the house they would build together, not to replace what had been lost, but to honor it by creating something new. Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct before settling again, secure in the knowledge of her mother's presence nearby. Mirabel watched her daughter with a fullness of heart that bordered on pain, the sweet ache of having regained what she had thought forever lost. It won't be easy, Alder said, following her gaze to Sarah. There will be talk prejudice. Some will never accept us. Some never accepted James and me either, Mirabel replied. Yet we built a life of meaning together. She squeezed his hand. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to proceed despite it. Your husband's words. No, she smiled. Mine. Alder's answering smile held appreciation, respect, and something deeper that needed no name between them yet. They had time now, time to build, to heal, to discover the shape of this unexpected connection that had formed in the crucible of shared danger and loss. In the months and years that followed, the house at the valley's end became known throughout the territory not for its size or grandeur, but for what it represented. A home where all were welcome, regardless of color or creed. a place where two rivers people traded freely with settlers, where Sarah Morgan Calloway grew into a formidable young woman who would eventually carry her parents' principles to Washington as Wyoming's first female territorial representative. And at its heart, the unlikely family that had formed from the ashes of tragedy, Mirabel, whose quiet strength had withstood the worst life could offer. Alder, whose capacity for tenderness belied his imposing presence. And Sarah, who carried forward the legacy of two fathers, one by birth and one by choice. Travelers passing through would sometimes ask about the house's origins, curious about the diverse group of people who seemed to find welcome there. Mirabel would smile and offer the simple truth that had become their family motto, carved into the main support beam by Alder's skilled hands. A house stands not by the strength of its walls, but by the courage of those who choose to remain when storms come. The end.